Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be continuing into the second unit of AP Psychology. This one is Sensation and Perception. This video is going to focus specifically as a short one just on optical illusions, Gestalt principles, and perceptual errors. Without further ado, let's get started. So first off, kind of understanding the difference between sensation and perception. Sensation is our bodies using different sensory receptors. Think of them as like different sensory gadgets to gather information on the world around us. So for us to be able to perceive and understand the environment that we live in, these sensors, our skin, our nose, our eyes, our mouth, our ears, etc., help us as kind of these beacons to gather in information for us to send to our brain to be looked at and understood. So sensation basically is just us gathering information on the world around us. Where perception, on the other hand, is the meaning, the understanding of what that information is trying to tell us. When we're looking at something, those signals go to our brain, and our brain, using perception, is trying to make meaning or understanding of what this is. Looking at a pair of shoes and knowing that it's a certain cost or knowing the brand of it is an example of perception. Absolute threshold is the idea that there is a minimum amount of stimulation or information that's needed to be detected by our senses to be able to detect something about 50% of the time. What this means is if we don't have enough volume or we don't have enough brightness, we won't be able to notice or detect that sensation. An example could be turning up the volume until we're able to hear it. Once our ears are able to perceive it and actually hear the sound, we hit our absolute threshold. I like to think of it as a meter that we're trying to fill, trying to get to the top of that meter and hit that threshold to be able to detect it with our sense of hearing or sight. Now, transduction is the idea that we can take energy, like a sound wave in hearing or a light wave in sight, and turn it or translate it into an energy chemical. This kind of chemical signal can be sent to the brain and could be interpreted with perception. Without turning energy into this chemical signal, our brain doesn't speak the same language and wouldn't be able to perceive the world around us. So transduction is the most important term of this unit, especially once we talk about the senses, because without it, none of our senses would work. Now we have just noticeable difference. This is similar to absolute threshold, but this one is specifically the bare minimum amount of change that is needed for you to detect a change between two stimuluses 50% of the time. What that means is if we're turning the volume up on the radio from 55 to 56, we're not probably going to notice that change. Maybe it takes up to 59, about a couple notches on the volume, for us to actually notice, oh, this song is louder. That is the second that we notice a difference in volume. That's our just noticeable difference. It could be trying to change the brightness on a light bulb by each small little kind of change until we actually notice, oh, that light is brighter. All right, figure ground is the idea that when we're looking at something, we kind of separate the foreground and the background from each other. So for example, if we look at this image over here, we might see a vase and a black background. Or on the flip side, we might see two faces looking at each other with a white background. Basically, our eyes like to focus on something with, clarity in front, and everything behind it kind of goes into this blurry kind of background. Now, Gestalt principles are ways that we understand our environment and kind of put things together, in whether it's groups or patterns or wholes. Now, here are some of the main ones that you need to know for the AP exam. Proximity, if you look over here kind of on the right side, basically means that objects that are close to each other we group together. So seeing these 6 circles, we would most likely assume that there are 2 groups. These 2 circles that are next to each other and these 4 circles that are next to each other. Think of it kind of like friends in the cafeteria. We see these 2 sitting here and these 4. We would assume these are 2 separate tables. So proximity just means people that are close to each other or objects we group together. Similarity is very simple and very similar. However, instead of proximity, like the closeness, we look at the similarities. So if objects look the same, like these 3 squares or these 3 circles, we look at those as groups. We would consider the squares a group, and we consider the circles a group. Continuity is the idea that we prefer smooth, continuous patterns rather than broken up ones. So for example, if you look at this kind of wavy line over here looks like there's a relationship, looks like they're connected somehow. Now we also have the idea of closure. If you look over here to the right, we like to close missing parts of something to make a whole. Now this looks like a circle, but technically it's not. Since there's a small little opening here, it's not a full circle. Our brain sees this as almost like a circle, 95 to 90%, and we just close that gap. Same thing with this. We would kind of complete these missing parts and consider this a triangle. Now this last one is connectedness and common fate. This idea just means that objects that move together we see as being in the same group. So if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 arrows going to the right. We consider these all going the same direction, so we consider these in group 1. Now this arrow going to the left is going by itself a separate direction. We'd consider that its own group. So basically these 4 that are going to the right are a group. This one going to the left is a group. Basically, if objects are moving the same direction, we group them together. Last thing on this one is after images. This is part of the opponent processing theory of vision that we'll get into in another video. But the idea that if we look at something for a long period of time, our photoreceptors in our eye, the small kind of receptors of light and photons, begins to get fatigued and tired. And once it kind of absorbs all this light data, the second you look away, you might see an after image, or an image that isn't actually there anymore, of the opposite color. So it could be, for example, like a red to a green or a black to a white, where if we're looking at that image for a long period of time and look up, we might see that opposite color. We've seen this in class when we looked at the different flags, for example, and all the things of such. And that kind of shows us how our eyes will flip from one color to the next. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. This was another very short video just going over the Gestalt principles and a couple types of perceptive kind of aspects of our senses and perception. Thank you so much, and have a good one. Peace.